Hey there, this is Jexy with the Systems Alliance, and in this video, we're going to go ahead and check out the 3-day weekend and the 5-day weekend box office that includes Christmas. And right now, Aquaman is leading not only domestically, but internationally as well. So number one in both, where Bumblebee and Mary Poppins try to fight it out for second place. So hitting expectations almost exactly was Aquaman domestically, coming in at around $67.4 million. And that's expected to be $105 million once you factor in Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So a great opening for Aquaman, but surprisingly it left a lot of other movies in its dust. Leading up to this weekend, as of a month ago, people weren't even sure if Mary Poppins or Bumblebee would be finishing number one, or if Aquaman would even be down to number 3, and then people weren't sure if internationally that Aquaman was going to be number one. Maybe Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse would finish number one overall. Who knows? A lot of these movies were competing against the same audience, and especially with Spider-Man just releasing last weekend. I mean, you have at least 3 movies that fit the same demographic in Aquaman, Spider-Man, and Bumblebee. Now, Mary Poppins is supposed to be the family-friendly one, but at the same time, you still have some Christmas movies out like The Grinch, but then Aquaman is also kind of vying for that same audience too. So trying to go after both the comic book audience and then just the mass audience who just wants to enjoy a cool film during the Christmas holiday. The long-term prospects for Aquaman seem to look good, and it's not only because it's finally another fresh movie for DC on Rotten Tomatoes, but also the audience scores at 86%. So one of the highest scores for a DCEU movie, and that just really bodes well. What also bodes well, it's its international total so far. And internationally, it finished number one for the 3rd week in a row, gathering in $91.3 million from overseas markets. So Aquaman is now out in 70 markets internationally, and the total there now stands at $410.7 million. So already it's on pace to beat every single DCEU movie internationally, which is big because the biggest one, Batman v Superman, did do really well overseas. And when you add in its domestic total of $72.1 million, which includes the Amazon Prime showings that were earlier, its global total now stands at $482.8 million. So how is this tracking versus other DCU movies? You know, these numbers are big, but what do they mean? What exactly are we comparing them to? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Right now it's tracking 22% ahead of Batman v Superman, which finished with over 543 million. So we're definitely on the way to probably at least 600, and who knows, it could be even higher than that if it has really good legs like it has in China. It's tracking 52% above Justice League, which finished with 428 million, but also keep in mind that Justice League had actually some pretty decent legs. And speaking of decent legs at the box office, Wonder Woman finished with over 409 million internationally. So that's a big number, but Aquaman is tracking 86% ahead of Wonder Woman. Now, if you look at the totals, Wonder Woman, Justice League, Batman v Superman, I mean, Wonder Woman's not too far off at 409 million from Justice League at 428 million. So how can it be 55% of Justice League, but yet it's 86% ahead of Wonder Woman? Well, the reason is because how fast they opened up and how fast they fell in their individual markets. Wonder Woman, even in the United States, only opened at around 100 million, but it made well over 400 million. So really, Wonder Woman just has really great legs in the box office. It keeps on going and going and going, and both internationally and here in the United States and Canada, it really didn't have any large drops at all week to week. It was only very small drops, and so part of the reason of that is because everyone loved Wonder Woman so much. Now, Batman v Superman, while Aquaman is only tracking 22% ahead of that movie, that is a really good thing because that was such a massive opening with a huge fall. Batman v Superman was one of the largest global openings for any movie in history. So when you take a look at that and then you consider where it ended up at, if Aquaman has any sort of better legs than Batman v Superman, I mean, we could be looking at 700 million internationally. So we'll just have to see how it holds up, but right now it's looking pretty good. And Justice League was somewhere in the middle where it had decent legs, but not nearly what Wonder Woman had. Obviously, a lot more than what Batman v Superman had. And when you look at those movies, many would say the theatrical release, at least, that would be the order of how you would place them. Wonder Woman being the best and Batman v Superman theatrically being the worst. Though the Snyder Cut, a lot of people will move that well above Justice League, but it wasn't released theatrically, so that's the only numbers we have to go on right now. Aquaman still has yet to be released in Australia, Italy, and Japan, so those are three pretty big box office countries that still have yet to contribute to the total for Aquaman's international growth, so we're looking pretty good on that front. Now, as far as internationally this weekend, it opened in South Korea for 9.9 million, France for 6.2 million, and Germany for 4.2 million. It also opened up in Spain for 2.8 million and Hong Kong for 2.7 million, so once again, great opening weekends in every single country it's been out, and even though it's obviously going to have a 67, 70, and then total over 100 million 5-day weekend for the United States is actually one of the smallest in terms of what movies generally do. So this is going to have a very large portion of the total gross for Aquaman be international. Now we'll just have to see. Does that mean it can beat Wonder Woman? Can it beat that total? Because it doesn't seem like it's going to get nearly as much money domestic as Wonder Woman, but internationally, it's well ahead of it. Justice League, it's almost a foregone conclusion that's going to beat that. Batman v Superman, that's going to be the test. That had a huge opening here, much, much bigger, but it fell off super fast. So Aquaman seems to be doing better with reviewers, with just people in general. So Aquaman might be the new #1 DCEU movie of all time. Now, when you factor in inflation, we'll see if it can touch the top 3. Now, the top DC movies of all time, of course, are still The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, both finishing with over $1.2 billion once you adjust for inflation. And then third is Superman, the original, Superman the movie, with over $1.1 billion. So those movies are going to be pretty hard to catch. I'm not sure if Aquaman is going to join the billion club, but who knows? If it has some decent legs here and can reach close to 300 million, it could reach 700 million internationally. So we could be looking at $1 billion movie for Aquaman, which would be a huge, think about where the DCU was before Aquaman. It left off on the Justice League, which was an absolute mess, not only of a movie in terms of the actual art, because it was just cut into pieces by Warner Brothers execs, and poor Zack Snyder and everyone else had pretty much no say in it. But financially as well, it was the lowest, and everyone would think the Justice League, much more famous than the Avengers going into all of this, that movie probably should have made, $2 billion, if not, $3 billion, something insane like that, but nope, under 700 million. But Aquaman, who knows, might be able to save the entire DCU before we head on to Shazam and other movies. So we'll just have to see. So as of right now, finishing second place, and of course these are estimated figures, is Mary Poppins at $22.2 million. For an entire 5-day frame, they're expecting $31 million. So this is definitely a lot less than they were expecting. I know the original estimates were saying, hey, might even be able to hit 100 in terms of the 5-day weekend. Those were tampered down. Then we started to look at, well, definitely maybe 70 million, but it doesn't look like it's going to hit nearly any of those numbers. We're looking at, for the total, once it's finished, because it did open up earlier, maybe somewhere between 55 and 65 million, probably on the lower end from its entire release date, which was earlier, including plus the 5-day weekend. So that's a lot of time to make money, and I guess people just aren't seeing it. And I felt like this movie was going to have a problem if the reviews weren't in the 90s. And I know Rotten Tomatoes doesn't dictate anything, but if Rotten Tomatoes reviewers were in the mid-90s on this Mary Poppins movie, I would be expecting a lot of people to go see it, because what the entire movie has to rely on is the performance of Mary Poppins, basically. And if that wasn't hitting a home run for pretty much everyone, it just wasn't going to get the following. It's a tough act to follow. You have the original Mary Poppins. Everyone loves that movie. To top it, it's really difficult. And apparently this one is just kind of a totally different type of movie than the first. So it's not surprising it's not hitting very well, but I don't think the production costs were necessarily crazy high either. So we'll have to see how it does. It did open with over $20 million overseas as well. So pretty small total, and once again, we're just going to have to see what kind of legs this one has. If it's able to make some decent amount of money, or if it's going to be not necessarily a flop, because I judge flops if they actually lose money, but just kind of a meh movie. And speaking of meh openings, you have Bumblebee. Once again, a lot of people were thinking, okay, Bumblebee, yeah, it might not get as much as Mary Poppins, but that was another candidate for this, what Aquaman's getting, that 100 million over 5 days. Bumblebee was a candidate for that. A lot of people thought Bumblebee would beat out Mary Poppins and Aquaman, but turns out that's not the case, as Bumblebee's up opening with a 3-day total of just 21 million, so not a lot there. And internationally, Bumblebee just brought in over 31 million, so not a huge total for a Transformers movie, and the last Transformers movie really fell off. I mean, the one before it was $1.2 billion, and then the last Transformers movie was in the $600 million range. And it was pretty much dead in the United States. It died overseas, so it'll be really interesting to see if Bumblebee can get the people back to that franchise. Oddly enough, it's by far the best reviewed Transformers movie. So I do want to put that out there. Critics seem to be loving this movie. I know the audience rating may not be as high as the critics, but it's still up there. It's very positive. So overall, it's funny because the whole knock on the Transformers franchise was that the movies were bad, but they still made billions of dollars. So what did bad movie even mean? But now apparently you have a good Transformers movie and it's not making the money. Now, did it come too late? I mean, there was just that Transformers movie out last year. Are people having crappy Transformers movie fatigue and they're just not even giving Bumblebee a chance? Maybe. We'll just have to see, but I am sure since most people still do not check, Rotten Tomatoes before they go see a movie, they're probably thinking it's just another bad Transformers movie, and thus the box office is suffering for it. Now, it didn't cost nearly as much as the others, so hopefully it can still make a profit considering it's good, but the weight of the Transformers franchise is definitely weighing very heavily on Bumblebee, and unfortunately it's dragging it down. Now, coming in fourth is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, dropping 53% to 16.7 million. So this is a much sharper drop off than many expected for this movie, but in reality, it just has too much competition. Aquaman is of the same demographic, Bumblebee is of the same demographic, Mary Poppins is trying to take the family audience away from it as well. Spider-Man just has too much competition, and it kind of stinks, Obviously a very well-reviewed movie, but I think people really just want live action with their comic book characters in terms of what they're really going to go out there and see. That's what appeals to the people outside of the comic book world. So to me, it's not surprising that this movie is raking in what it is. What is surprising to me is still the $90 million budget that it had. So still a pretty high budget for a movie that, wasn't traditional CG animation. Obviously, it was still expensive, but this movie is going to have some legs, and right now this first weekend drop is not a good sign for it. And it's going to need to have legs in order to make a profit, because as of right now, it still hasn't turned one. So this weekend it opened in China, bringing in $26.1 million, and total internationally, it has $64.8 million. So while that is a decent total, China loves Spider-Man. I mean, China, for the other Spider-Man movies, was bringing in a ton of money. So the fact that it's not able to bring in a bunch of money, I mean, it's barely beating out Aquaman, which is already in its third week in China. Spider-Man is supposed to be huge, and once again, I think it just has to do with people want the live-action Spider-Man. They're not really wanting animated. Otherwise, why would you not watch this movie? I mean, it's a really good movie, but it's just not bringing in the audiences like they hoped. And rounding out the top 5 is Clint Eastwood's The Mule, coming in at just under 10 million, 9.95 million. Who knows how that'll be adjusted. So we'll just say 10 million at the end of this weekend. The Mule's total now stands at 35.6 million, and internationally it has not been released yet, so that's just its total. And I do want to touch on why movies like Bumblebee, Mary Poppins, Spider-Man are kind of underperforming based to what the expectations were before. And really, there's just too much competition. They're releasing all in the same window, with most of them within the same week, and you want to really have a 2-week buffer between your movie and a movie that's going after the same audience. So none of these movies have that. They're going after the same thing. So even though the Christmas weekend is generally a very busy weekend for movies, I mean, you get that big 5-day weekend where you can rack up a lot of money. If there's so much competition, they just cannibalize themselves. And the one movie that's not looking like it's being cannibalized is Aquaman. So let me know what your thoughts are on this weekend. Do you think Aquaman is going to have the legs? Do you think it could break 800 million? Do you think it could break a billion? Let me know. Do you think at least it's going to end up number 1 for the DCEU that we're currently in? Let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Where do you think this movie is going to end up? And are you disappointed with its total given that the movie received such positive reviews? Let me know what you think about Bumblebee. Do you think this is going to be the lowest grossing Transformers movie of all time? Right now it's definitely tracking that way. But do you think it's kind of unfortunate, once again, like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, with that it has the best reviews out of all the movies, yet it's making the least amount of money? And finally, let me know what you think about Mary Poppins. Do you think that movie is going to have the legs it's going to need to become a hit? Or do you think it's going to kind of fizzle out like some of the other Disney live action movies that have come out recently? Let me know your thoughts on this. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Twitter, and we'll catch you later.